Hi everyone, welcome to NOVAsia podcast. I'm Ko from the media team of NOVAsia, and today we're going to dive into the topic LGBTQ plus in Korea and India. So where we are and what's next. And also this episode is brought to you in collaboration with Human Rights Hub of Yonsei GSIS. And we have these two special guests with me today to help us to understand about this topic and also the relevant issues. Hi, welcome.
Hi.
So could you introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone. My name is Pilgyu Shin, and I am staff member of the Beyond the Rainbow Foundation. It's the first foundation for supporting LGBTQ plus rights movement in South Korea. And I'm also a producer and cast member of LGBTQ plus YouTube channel called Q Planet. And then contents, we provide English subtitle. So if you're interested, please subscribe our channel.
Hey guys, my name is Vidur. I'm a GSI student at Yonsei. I'm from India, and I've been in Korea for the past couple of years now. I identify as part of the queer community. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, thank you for being here. Let's begin by exploring how LGBTQ plus individuals are being perceived in each of your countries. So in Korea, what do you think? Are they being more open to the LGBT plus community, or do you think there's still the way to go?
Over the past few decades, South Korea society has experienced many social and cultural changes. The same goes for LGBTQ+. It is known that LGBTQ+ rights movements in South Korea began in early 1990s. Organizations and many online groups were established at that period. And they made movements for LGBTQ+ rights. They also campaigned for improved citizens' awareness about the LGBTQ+ in South Korea. Also, Western pop culture featuring LGBTQ+ characters and culture also affected the perception of young people in particular. For example, like Sex and the City or Queer as Folk eras. As a result, South Korea society awareness of the LGBTQ+ has improved. More and more citizens are aware of the existence of LGBTQ+ has increased. But there is still a long way to go. There are several problems. Several decades are not enough time to change the perception of LGBTQ+ in whole South Korea society. Positive changes are recent. There are still people in Korea who hate and reject LGBTQ+. According to this year's survey by Korean Research, 43% of Koreans have hostile feelings toward LGBTQ+. And here is something to note. Only 16% of people have positive feelings, and 40% of people responded that they have neutral feelings to LGBTQ+ people. Just because 43% are hostile does not mean that the rest have positive feelings. There are many people who do not have any particular thoughts or feelings about LGBTQ+ people. There are many people who don't even care about the discrimination and hate that LGBTQ+ people are facing. Also, the problem of extreme attitudes toward the LGBTQ+ people. In fact, I think this is a global trend surrounding various social issues. It is true that many South Koreans treated LGBTQ+ unfair and show disrespect in the past. However, people who actively express hatred and anger have showed up. This group opposed the advancement of LGBTQ+ right. They want to restrict the LGBTQ+ right, and openly spread the fake news. They spread fake news about the LGBTQ+, and people who want to shift their social dissatisfaction onto minorities are deceived by this fake news so easily. We are concerned that most of people who conduct this kind of hatred are younger generation. Of course, there is a growing number of LGBTQ+ allies among the younger generation, but there is also extreme LGBTQ+ hatred. It's like two sides of the same coin.
And so what about in India? Like, is there like any changes over time, or do you think there are still like things that are complicated in the society?
I'll try my best to give as detailed a response, but that was great. Thank you so much. That was
You're
very
welcome.
interesting. In terms of India, right, I think there's definitely a growing trend of positivity towards LGBTQ and acceptance into society. But I think it's very similar to Korea, where in the sense that there's also a lot of negative discussions or attitudes, or thinking that, it's just a phase, or, people should be converted, stuff like that. I think in 2018, India recently decriminalized homosexuality. So even as recent as 6-7 years ago, it was very much criminal to be homosexual. So it was in the law. I think it wasn't really that enforced, but there was still a chance that you could be, sent to jail or prosecuted just because you're homosexual and you engage in homosexual activities as described by them. So now there is no legal basis, and it's very much legal. And the Supreme Court recently also, I think, identified the right of homosexual and LGBTQ plus people. I guess when I mean to say homosexual here and queer and LGBTQ, I mean the broad community in general, because it's very hard to differentiate and there's a lot of variations. But in general, the queer community, I guess, they now have a right to live together, even though the government doesn't necessarily provide any certificates, which causes a lot of legal troubles, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But essentially, I would say there's a growing trend of positivity, especially in terms of Bollywood. I think there's been 1 or 2 movies where the movie, I guess, is especially about, two gay men trying to find love. And it is the central part of the story, and the main characters are queer, at least in the movie, not their real lives. So I think in terms of that, I think there's definitely we're moving in the right direction broadly. But negative attitudes still persist.
Yeah, so even though there is a small changes, I mean we're still progressing.
Absolutely.
With opening up.
Yeah.
Right?
I just want to add a very small thing. And I guess this goes for everyone, but especially considering that India is a very diverse country. And I've lived abroad for the past couple of years. I may not be the best person that knows everything that's going on. And because I identify as a queer community member, I think I know probably more than most people in India do about what's going on, but I'm not an expert. So I will try my best, and I did some research before coming here as well. But it's a very complicated case because LGBTQ plus, I think and your rights and your access to a lot of stuff not only depends on, I guess, being Indian, but also essentially which part of the country you live in, how much money you have, education in terms of, even religion. So there's a lot of different factors that affect it. So you could put 2 queer people in you could compare them, but because they identify as part of different communities, as well as being part of the queer community, they can have very differing kind of access to stuff. So it's a very intersectional, complicated issue, and it's very hard to compare, I guess, directly.
Right. I think as you mentioned, religion and tradition, there are lots of complicated things in our society. So and also it plays a really big role in shaping our society, and it influences this kind of how we view this LGBTQ plus community. So do you think it actually influences, and do you think they are more open to the community, and also is there any changes over the past years?
So in terms of religion, I'll say it outright. I mean, there's plenty of religions, but the 3, I guess, most popular religions in India would be Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. So if you identify as Muslim and you're like that, I think there is research that you're more at risk of violence from society, especially if you're Muslim and identify as queer. And that's a general thing in Islam, was that I think the majority of the idea, I'm not saying everybody, but the majority of the thing is that homophobia is very persistent. And I guess being queer or identify as being part of the LGBT community, it's very risky because it goes against scriptures. It goes against a lot of national laws and essentially the community's kind of views towards the community. So I guess in terms of religion and tradition, there's a long history of, I guess, LGBTQ history in India, where it is often commonly said that before British colonization in the late 1800s, LGBTQ, it was more or less, I think you also brought this point up, was that there wasn't really a view of society. People were allowed to do what they want. Maybe it wasn't very accepted, but there were no laws that said it was illegal. People were in general. But it's also hard to say because there was no government back then. So, nowadays our society is very much structured and regulated in a lot of ways that it wasn't hundreds of years ago. So in terms of, I guess, you could talk about colonialism and how the British government in India back then, I guess, introduced laws against, I guess, LGBTQ plus people and homosexuality, which forbade and criminalized a lot of activities. So essentially being queer or being caught engaged in consensual intercourse was very much forbidden, and you could pretty much land in jail. So that kind of law persisted all the way until, I guess 2018. And that was decriminalized recently. So I think there's different aspects when you talk about LGBTQ. It's not only there's a legal aspect, there's a social or cultural or traditional kind of aspect. So in terms of religion, you could say Islam, I guess. Again, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I think it would be hard for anyone to disagree with me that it is very hard to be Muslim openly and unopenly gay at the same time because it carries a high amount of risk. And in India, I think Christianity also is hard. Being Hindu, I guess, which my family is, it's still hard, but I don't think it's as hard as being Muslim and being openly gay. It's a very complicated topic because of my own identity and my family's values. So I guess, it really shapes people's views because people often tend to look towards what their values and tradition and religion says to kind of think about topics that they're not familiar with.
My answer will be focused on the church. To be precise, conservative Protestantism in Korea is a big obstacle for LGBTQ plus movement. In fact, conservative Protestantism in Korea does not have a big influence on people. There are problems such as corruption of church foundation, sexual crimes by pastors, and excessive collusion with conservative politics. Looking back history, South Korea conservative Protestantism has enjoyed great power by colluding with dictatorial governments. And at the same time, Korea conservative churches try to create enemies of the group and unite their believers through LGBTQ hatred. They do this by organizing rallies and protests against the advancement of LGBTQ rights and claiming discrimination. They also promoted hatred by creating fake news. This reality is a great obstacle to the advancement of LGBTQ rights. But the story doesn't end here. There are certainly progressive Protestant churches that claim to be LGBTQ plus allies, and their number are growing. It's good news. Pastors and members of these churches are very passionate about promoting LGBTQ plus rights and protecting them. Sometimes they do not back down, even in face of the unreasonable interference from their denomination. There are also members who don't agree with the conservative pastor's sermons that contain LGBTQ plus hate, but they usually remain silent because of the church atmosphere. I believe that the day will come when they will speak out as our society gradually changes.
I think the society itself is really complicated, all the cultural things and also religion and political things. So it's all combined. And also, if it is really ingrained in the society, like the religion or tradition, that it really reflects a lot of things in not only the LGBTQ plus community, but also in other things as well. So now let's talk about the legal side of things. So how well do you think the legal system supports the LGBTQ plus individuals? So is there a relevant laws or protections that the government provides, or is there any need to be changed or introduced more?
I think first of all, there definitely needs to be change, positive change, and definitely needs to be improved in terms of protections. But in terms of LGBT+, I think India is also very unique because I guess you could kind of divide it into two things, right? One is what you identify your gender as, and what you identify your sexuality as. Sexuality is who you're attracted to. Maybe you're not attracted to any specific gender, or maybe no gender. But gender is another thing which you identify as again. So the Indian government does have very strong protections, I could say, at least in the constitution and on paper. Maybe it's not as, maybe that's not like it in real life. But if you talk about specific legality, I think transgender people definitely have a right to identify as trans, and they can have that recorded on their ID cards. But in terms of sexuality, you could say just because it's decriminalized doesn't mean it's still easy, I guess, to be attracted to other genders in India. So I think recently, I think in 2019 or 20, I'm not too sure about the date, the Supreme Court rejected petitions and hearings to kind of legalize same-sex marriage in India. Why? Because I guess why the case was brought up in the first place, because I think four couples, gay or lesbian, I think they were petitioning the court saying, we're living together and that's legal, but if my partner dies, I will not be able to be there. They won't have access to the same medical insurance. They won't have access to bank accounts, pensions, stuff like that. So there's a lot of, I guess, lack of protections. So just because you're allowed to do it doesn't mean it's easy. So I think it's very much hard for people, people of different sexual identities and people dating members of their own gender or different genders than the normal, I guess, male to female thing that is normalized in society. It's very hard for them to access the same rights or benefits. So I think that is why this case was filed, and the Supreme Court rejected it, saying that yes, they did face discrimination, and yes, they think the government should do something about it, but the Supreme Court will not overstep and make a law, because according to the Indian Supreme Court, they can't make laws. It's up to the legislative body and the executive body, essentially the parliament and the current party in power, to kind of move that on. So there's kind of like a battle, and I think the public opinion was that, at least in the positive part of society, was that it's sad that they acknowledge that these people go through troubles, but then they say that they can't do anything about it, and it's up to another part of the government. So this is very funny, because I think that's frustration we all face in society when we want to go do something and we go to a person, they're saying, "Oh,
you should go to another."
Yeah, they're like, "I'm very sorry,
Right.
Like I feel for you," but then go to some other person. And you go to some other person, they're like, "Oh, I can't do anything. You have to go to another person." So it's kind of like pushing it around. So it is acknowledged that yes, same-sex people, like LGBTQ plus people exist. They face discriminations, and yes, there's a lot that needs to be done, but who will do it? So there's a lot of political, legal things. So, but it's very, I guess it's a good thing that it's at least recognized and there is a conversation going on about it. But again, yeah, that's how it is.
In South Korea, LGBTQ plus people are also got general protection under the law. For example, if someone beats me because I'm a gay people, the Korean court will punish that person for assault. Of course, they may not consider it important that this is a hate crime against gay people. However, this is my obvious right as a citizen. We must apply the law fairly to everyone. And in Korea, this principle is observed at formal level. But in practical level, LGBTQ plus people do not receive equal protection under the law. This is due to absence of laws. For example, the Anti-Discrimination Act contains articles that effectively prevent discrimination against social minorities, including LGBTQ plus people. According to this bill, if an act of discrimination is confirmed, the National Human Rights Commission can recommend correction and enforcement fines if the recommendation is not followed. But they are here again. Conservative church hate groups. It sounds really weird, but it makes sense in South Korea, sadly. Conservative church hate groups are opposing the passage of this bill. They say that the part that prohibits discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation is problem. This is why bill has failed to pass since 2006. There are also no laws or systems that ensure that transgender people have legal status that matches their gender identity. And without that legal status, transgender people can't go to school or get a job freely. Because Congress is passive in making laws, LGBTQ plus people who face discrimination seek justice from the court. And court ruling have made progress in helping transgender people obtain legal status according to their gender identity. And court also help same-sex couples receive equal treatment by National Health Insurance Service. However, judicial rulings do not have much influence on politics, especially when it comes to basic rights.
So now let's talk about the same-sex marriage and partnership. Like same-sex marriage is not yet legal in both Korea and India. So how close do you think the country is recognizing this part? And do you think there is more of a progress, or is there still things that are holding back?
So at this year, July, the Supreme Court of South Korea ruled that same-sex couples are eligible to receive the same health insurance benefit as heterosexual couples. It was remarkable progress, and many organizations and people, including Marriage for All, have dedicated themselves to this result. But there is still a long way to go. There are two main ways to achieve marriage equality: amending the law or receiving a court ruling that the current law that does not guarantee marriage equality is unconstitutional. Amending the law is difficult. Maybe you predict. This is the same reason why anti-discrimination law was not enacted. It is because conservative church hate groups are against it. In fact, an attempt was made to amend the law for marriage equality under the lead of former National Assembly member Jeehyun of the Justice Party. However, it was not enacted in the end. But of course, people are still trying to amend the law. In October of this year, same-sex couples filed for a constitutional review of the current law that limits marriage to that of heterosexual couples. 11 same-sex couples filed a lawsuit. The ultimate goal is to have the Constitutional Court of Korea rule that the current law is unconstitutional. It is difficult to predict what ruling will be because the courts in South Korea are conservative. For example, in 2023, the Constitutional Court ruled that the article in military criminal law that punish same-sex activity is constitutional. However, it is too early to draw a dark conclusion. The court in South Korea is conservative, but it has also made very progressive ruling at unexpected moments. So I think this is why LGBTQ plus community should work hard for marriage equality.
I think before I try to answer from, I guess, perspective of my country and myself, I think Korea, especially LGBTQ community in Korea, has a hard time, especially because of mandatory military service, right?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty similar in India as well, wherein in the military, I think the official stance is that it's not legal or illegal. It's just don't say it. I think because if you do, there will be a lot of repercussions. I think it's kind of similar to the US where you say don't say gay. I think it was just they're not able to protect you because in the military kind of doctrine, it is illegal. Like all of these things. It's the military. Military often is the most conservative and strict part of the societies in a very traditional manner. So I think Korea especially the community in Korea has a hard time because there's no option and choice because in India it's voluntary. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up because I just wanted to, I guess, also kind of respond to that. I guess in terms of same-sex partnerships in India, I think the courts are also very conservative. In the Supreme Court ruling a couple of years ago, where they were debating whether to legalize same-sex marriage, I think the majority of the judges said no, even though I guess 2 people said yes. So again, it's because it's a group of people sitting on a bench trying to decide based on the constitution what's okay. And I think their reasoning was that it may or may not be unconstitutional. It may strictly go against the law. But because they interpret the constitution, they say, oh, yes, the constitution says this, but I think it means this. So I think their reasoning was that the family identity in India usually has a man, a woman married to each other, and they have 2 kids. So that's like the traditional kind of family unit, right? And they believe like legalizing it would kind of disturb like society in India as well. So I think they also, conservative elements, or especially judges in the Supreme Court and other justice departments, etc., they view like changing the laws or ruling something as potentially something that can disturb the national identity. So I don't agree with that excuse for obvious reasons. But yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's hard to determine the timeline for how far it is, because sometimes I can say like it can be out of the blue where you keep trying and trying and trying, and somehow it's just ruled constitutional. And we also talked about how they can be a legal thing, but then in society, in practice, it can be different. But yeah, I think still have a way to go, and have to keep trying.
Yeah, it sounds like the change takes time,
Yeah.
and also, like resilience, or, like the activism of the advocacy group, and also from the public. I think those could actually like make some changes at the end.
Sorry.
No problem. Just don't say sorry.
Because it's hard
It's fine.
because we're going back and forth. This is this is a very complicated topic, and there's so much you can say. So I'm trying to keep it relevant. But I think from a survey conducted in India very recently, it said that 53% of Indian people are like pro kind of same-sex marriage. And there's like 43% who are against it, and maybe the people. But again, these are surveys, and it's hard to capture every person's opinion. Also accounting for the fact that these surveys may be answered by people who have college degrees or people living in cities, especially people who are literate. So these people often have more of a liberal viewpoint as opposed to people living in rural areas. So we can say, oh, these surveys says that, but then it's hard to capture the opinions of 1.5 billion people. So when you say change takes time, it can even be sometimes as maybe in a few generations, because I guess you could say the people who are now 20, 30 years old, and maybe in another 20, 30 years, they'll be in charge of governments or courts. So that may influence. I'm not saying everyone is going to be pro LGBTQ+, but there may be more people from our generations or the previous generations who will go on to have important positions, who can do more change in society.
Well, I think we can also talk about the healthcare, like access and the services. So, what do you think, like, the key issues that actually LGBTQ plus have when it comes to, getting this kind of like cares that actually they need? So, do you think they are getting like enough services or access for it or not?
I want to emphasize once again the importance of transgender people having legal status that matches their gender identity. In South Korea, you can find out person's gender just by looking at their registration number. It's kind of Korean version of social security number. So transgender people who haven't legally changed their gender have a hard time to visiting hospital, because hospitals can easily see that a transgender person's legal status doesn't match their gender identity. So transgender people are worried about being asked rude questions or being discriminated in hospital. Stigma is also barrier. During the COVID pandemic, there was a mass infection at gay club in Itaewon. Itaewon is kind of a famous gay district in South Korea, Seoul. And the media reported this in very sensational and irresponsible way, because they have kind of guideline about the making news about the LGBTQ plus people, but they don't follow that guideline while they making news about this. So many gays were afraid to get tested and treated for fear that their sexual orientation would be revealed. This is because the Korean government at that time recorded the movements of infected people. If there was no stigma against gay in this society, no one would be afraid of finding out where they got COVID. And lastly, I would like to talk about mental health issue of LGBTQ plus people in South Korea. There are many difficulties. First of all, Korea used to be a country with a strong stigma against depression. There was strong tendency to perceive depression as a weakness rather than a disease. This tendency has weakened compared to the past, but it still remains. If a social group gets sick or die for the same reason, I think it is a social problem. And the government should solve the social problem, because that's what they exist for. It is well-known fact that discrimination against LGBTQ plus people in Korea society drives LGBTQ plus people to depression and suicide. However, the Korean government think that LGBTQ plus issues are politically sensitive, so they tend to ignore and avoid this issue, LGBTQ plus mental health issue. The Korean government does not conduct official statistics on how many LGBTQ plus people suffer mentally and die. Of course, there is no policy to prevent this problem. Surprisingly, they do not even survey the number of LGBTQ plus people in Korea. So there is no official research or survey.
I'm glad you brought up the both the physical health and the mental health aspect of LGBTQ plus individuals, because it's very important. So in terms of the healthcare industry in India, I don't think it's as advanced as a South Korean one. I think India does have great healthcare hospitals, but it's usually more private, and usually individuals need to pay their own money to access these services. Also, probably bring this up, I think 80% of doctors in India are part of the private sector. The insurance industry does exist, but most people pay out of pocket. So let's remove the equation of LGBTQ. Just every citizen of India, resident of India, I think a lot of people have trouble accessing healthcare. I mean, they do have access to it, but they just can't afford it. So in terms of public health, there are, I could say they do exist, and they are pretty generous in terms of, every resident of India being able to access them and having it for free. But then the quality and the availability of these resources is not very good. At least to my limited knowledge. So this is not something I'm very well aware of. But in terms of the private healthcare industry, as an LGBTQ person, if you have the resources to access it, you do have a great amount of choice in which hospital you can go to. But I also wanted to bring up, in terms of physical health, there's often also the risk and the talk of, sexual diseases, HIV, access to medications such as PrEP or PEP, which can decrease your chance of getting HIV if you're an at-risk individual. So these things, I believe there does need to be more advancements made and more knowledge being available. I know I keep coming back to this, but I guess as a queer person, it's very people in urban areas who are more educated and have more money have more access to these resources. I think that's true in a lot of countries, if not every scenario. So you sometimes have to not only have access to these things, but also the knowledge that these things exist. So I feel like healthcare is important, but also knowing that there's options for you and having this information available in society to every member is important. But that is where the hard part comes, because you can't be very public about these things, because I think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of conservative parts of society which are not, very, very accepting of these things. In terms of mental health, it's hard to put a finger. I think India is definitely on the conservative side of things in terms of mental health. I don't think it's too dissimilar than Korea in terms of depression, anxiety, stuff like that. And especially when it comes to an LGBTQ plus individual, there are counseling services. There's a lot of grassroots organizations that help you, that provide therapy or counseling, or especially in terms of emergency situations, they're there to, get you through the situation. But again, I think there's no government funded. It's not as accessible to everybody. It does exist. There are options, but I think if you're a queer person in India, you have a much harder time accessing healthcare, both physical and mental, because there's that whole aspect of, having to hide that part of yourself because you may not be accepted, than as compared to, say, a non-LGBTQ plus person in India.
Yeah, so I think raising this kind of awareness of the society, and also from the government part, is also important to get more the systematic healthcare system for in the policies and also the funding system, I think. So this will be my last question. What's your dream and hope for the LGBTQ plus communities, not only in your countries but also around the world? So what do you see in the future, and what do you hope about it?
It may sound little bit odd or stupid, but I want to be honest. As an activist, I don't really have any specific dreams or hopes. It's because of my job. The world changes really fast. Sometimes I thought some policy or law would be enough, but later turns out it often wasn't. It's not easy to know what we hope for. And no matter how much world progresses, backlash always comes back. We've seen that all over the world in the past few years. And sometimes there are amazing progress, but there are also moments when achievements fall apart so easily. So when I was in college, I had a senior. She participated in many social movements and ran for student council president to change the university, but she often failed. She never win the election. She ran for 2 or 3 times, but she never win. Usually she lost. So I asked her why she kept fighting losing battles. She said that she found herself in the fight for justice. She said she found for dignity with that. Yeah, of course, resistance against the hatred and discrimination is hard and exhausting thing. I think we are all have similar problem, and I buried my friends of LGBTQ plus community in my heart so many times. But my senior was right. There are moments I was able to endure this world because I resist. I was able to disagree with the haters because I fought them. I could against the haters thought that I deserve to be despised and discriminated because I'm a gay. And when resistance continue, people can gather at moment when changes is possible. Or maybe the world become a little less bad because we continue to engage in social movement. So here is conclusion. I want to see people constantly resisting discrimination and hatred and not giving up on themselves. And I want to see people not giving up on the world because they did not defeated by hatred. If we can keep fighting, there is a future. So yeah, that is hope for me, and that's the thing I want to see in future.
Thank you. That was very inspiring. I have things to add, but I'm not going to repeat what you said. You're right that all we can do is hope. But there's also, I think one thing is like not everyone can be an activist, right? There's people that want to achieve different goals. Sometimes it's very exhausting and defeating. I think like your senior, she sounds like a very interesting person. It's great that she finds, I guess, her dignity in trying to fight. But a lot of people, I guess, even if they see social injustice, they don't want to act because for them, I guess, it's just easier to move on with life and achieve other goals than trying to fight for something that they believe is going to be very hard. So they just believe that other people can fight and in the future, maybe it'll be different, but then I'm just kind of not going to do my part. But I guess to those people, I just want to say like activism is not essentially always fighting against governments or being on podcasts or I don't know, like going out in the streets and protesting. I mean, those can be very effective, but at times it can also be like trying to be a good member of society and I guess calling out injustice when it happens, trying to, I guess, essentially watch out for people, not only LGBTQ, but can be for many other social issues, right? It's trying to be understanding of people and not spread hatred. I think just by being a nice person who understands other people, I think that can be a very good goal of like, even as if you're a queer person, I think you have to be also very careful of how you view other people. Because sometimes when you're openly queer and other people, the person knows that, they sometimes have a generalization in their head that, oh, this is how queer people are. So I think at times you also have to be careful about how you interact because your behavior can affect that person's opinion. And if you're a nice person, you know, and you're understanding, that can potentially change a person's opinion in the long term of, okay, maybe they're just normal people. I think that that's a very important issue in race as well, is like when you look like a person of a certain ethnicity or race and you meet a person who's never met people like you before, they have an opinion of you, like already, or a stereotype that, oh, this person is probably going to be loud, or this person is going to have certain opinions, or this person is probably this religion. So I think by being a polite person, a nice person, and but like I'm not saying be nice or understanding if they're rude to you or mean to you, but I'm just saying try to be your best self so that people understand that, yes, because you're queer, yes, I'm Indian, that doesn't mean that I'm different. That just means that I'm a normal human being who has different qualities and maybe values, but that doesn't make me any more different than that person. So I think my hope would be that this can be viewed very wrongly, and I intend it in the best of respect to people who are fighting for the queer community, to LGBTQ individuals. But I hope that in the very long future, that being queer LGBTQ stops being essentially a label or an identity that is just viewed as something normal. I don't want people to have to come out because there's no reason to come out. I mean, because people don't have expectations that you will be straight. It's a very, coming out is such an LGBTQ plus thing or a queer thing, because why should I have to tell people that I'm different than them? Like it should be normal. I think that is kind of my hope, that it is so normalized that it shouldn't need to be something active. Like people shouldn't have expectations. You shouldn't have to come out because it shouldn't matter. So I guess that is essentially like my kind of hope.
Alright, so this is the end of this episode. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts and also for your time. See you next time.
See you next time.